So, hello everyone. We will now present a small summarization of a paper that is named A Comprehensive Survey of Graph Embedding Problem, Techniques and Application. So, here are the table of contents that we will go through in the following presentation. First, we'll give a brief introduction of this paper. Then we will answer the pertinent question, what is graph embedding and what is the real meaning of graph embedding. Then we will move on to the problem formalization part, in which we will mention the basic concepts and notations which are used in this paper for graph embedding. Then we will characterize the existing work and we will give a brief gist of existing work that was done in the field that is mentioned in this paper. Then we will define the types of input, different types of inputs of the graph embedding. Then we will define the types of output, which would be the different types of output that are present for the graph embeddings in this paper. Moving on, when then we'll move to the different techniques and we'll give a short gist of different techniques mentioned in this paper. Then we will move to the hybrid techniques, in which the previous techniques would be mixed together to produce a better results. Then we will shift our focus towards the application part, which is mentioned in the paper, and then we will list some of the future scopes which have been mentioned in the following paper. So moving on to the introduction part of this paper. So this paper is basically a comprehensive survey that provides an overview of the graph embedding techniques and their application. The author of this paper discusses the topic of graph embedding, which is basically a process of converting a low dimensional space, a graph into a low dimensional space while preserving its structural properties. Now, the paper introduces the formal definition of graph embedding and proposes the two taxonomies to categorize the existing work on problem setting basis and embedding techniques. So it also discusses different type of graph embedding inputs we will study in further slides, such as homogeneous graph, heterogeneous graph, graphs with auxiliary information, and constructed graph. The paper also explores various graph embedding techniques, and we will also mix those techniques at the end. And in the end, we will also discuss some of the applications of these. So, what is graph embedding? So, in this section, we'll cover that. So, what is graph embedding? So according to the paper, graph embedding is defined as the process of representing a graph into a low-dimensional space while preserving its structural properties. Now, it aims to learn a set of low-dimensional vectors that capture the essential information of the graph, such as node relationship, community structure, and global graph properties. Graph embedding techniques transforms the graph into a vector space where each node or edge is represented as a low-dimensional vectors. These vectors encode the structural information of the graph, allowing for efficient computation and analysis of graph-related tasks. The paper also distinguishes graph embedding from graph representation learning. So while graph representation learning does not require the learned representations to be low-dimensional, graph embedding specifically focuses on this part. Now coming on to the problem formalization part, in this we will cover the basics of the representations that have been covered in the paper. There have been 6 definitions that have been given. We will not go into the depth of that. So basic formalization is the problem formalization in the paper begins by introducing the basic concepts and notations. The graph is represented by GVE, where V is the set of nodes and E is the representation of set of edges. Authors have also denoted a substructure of the graph, which is a power exponential power of G is this. So further, author gives 6 definitions and notations, which have been the representations of homogeneous graph, heterogeneous graph. So we will discuss them in the coming slides. So existing work, brief gist of existing work done in the field, also along with the introduction of the two taxonomies that have been mentioned in this paper. So according to the paper, the existing work on the graph embedding can be categorized based on problem setting and embedding techniques. Now problem setting taxonomy. The problem setting taxonomy in graph embedding characterizes the existing work based on different types of embedding inputs and outputs. It also provides framework for understanding the challenges and requirement in each setting. The embedding technique taxonomy. The embedding text setting taxonomy categorizes graph embedding techniques based on different problem settings and their corresponding challenges. It provides a framework for understanding the variations in embedding inputs and outputs. This we will study in a brief detail in this slide, the problem setting taxonomy. So this is further divided into 5 types: node related embedding, and this category basically focuses on embedding individual nodes in the graph. It includes tasks such as node classification, node clustering, node retrieval, recommendation. Edge related embeddings. This category basically focuses on the embedding edges or pairs of node connected by edges. It includes tasks such as link prediction and edge classification. There is hybrid embedding. This category combines as the name suggests, the hybrid. This category basically combines the node related and edge related embedding. It includes tasks such as node pair classification and graph classification. There is one more type, whole graph embedding. This category represents the entire graph as a single vector. It includes tasks such as graph classification and graph similarity computation. The embedding technique taxonomy. This is further divided into matrix factorization. This technique represents the graph as matrix and factorizes it into lower dimensional representations using the linear algebra methods. Deep learning, this technique uses neural networks to learn node or graph embeddings. The generative model, this technique models the graph as generative process and learns embedding based on the generated graph. Node proximity matrix factorization, this technique leverages the proximity matrix of nodes to learn embeddings. So now this coming on to the types of embedding input. In this section, we will go through 4 types of input for the embedding provided in this paper. So now this paper categorizes graph embedding input into 4 types: homogeneous graph, heterogeneous graph, graph with auxiliary information, and the constructed graph. The homogeneous graph. The homogeneous graph is a graph where both nodes and edges belong to a single type. This type of graph can further be characterized as weighted and unweighted. Weighted graphs assign weights to the edges, while unweighted graphs does not have weights. Many graph embedding studies focus on unweighted and undirected homogeneous graph, treating all nodes equally. So the heterogeneous graph, as the name suggests, it's the just opposite of homogeneous. A heterogeneous is a graph where nodes and edges belong to different types. This type of graph introduces additional complexity in graph embedding, as different types of nodes and edges may have different characteristics and relationship. Embedding heterogeneous graphs requires capturing the heterogeneity and preserving the relationship between different types of nodes and edges. Graph with auxiliary information. In this setting, the graph is augmented with additional auxiliary information such as node attributes, edge attributes, or node labels. The auxiliary information provides additional context and can help improve the quality of graph embedding. For example, node attributes can provide additional features that capture the characteristics of node, while node labels can provide class labels for supervised learning. The constructed graph. In some cases, the input graph may be constructed or derived from other data sources. For example, you can have a graph that can be constructed from text data by representing words as nodes and co-occurrence relationship in edges. So constructed graphs pose unique challenges in graph embedding, as the structure and properties of the graphs are determined by the construction process. Types of output of the graph embedding. Here we'll go through the list of outputs that are produced after, for the graph embedding. The first part is the node embedding. So node embedding is the most common type of embedding output. In this setting, each node is in the graph is represented as a low dimensional vector. The goal is to embed the nodes that are close in the graphs to have similar vector representations, thus maintaining the similarity between them. And different graph embedding methods define the notion of closeness between different nodes differently. Some methods use first order proximity, which measures the direct connections between nodes, while other use a second order, and we can also use nth order proximity to capture the more complex relationship in the hybrid embeddings. So coming on to the hybrid embedding part, hybrid embedding combines node embedding and edge embedding. In this setting, both node and edges are represented as low dimensional vector. The objective is to preserve both the similarity between nodes and relationship between connected nodes. Hybrid embedding methods capture both node level and edge level information. Edge embeddings. So edge embedding focuses on edge embedding edges or pair of nodes connected by edges. In the node embedding, we had only the nodal part. Now we will coming to the attachment between those nodes. The goal is to capture the relationship between the connected node in the embedded space. Edge embedding methods aim to represent edges as low dimensional vector that encode the similarity or relationship between the connected nodes. Whole graph embedding. Whole graph embedding represents the entire graph as a single vector in low dimensional space. The goal is to capture the overall structure and properties of the graph. Whole graph embedding method aims to encode the global information of the graph into a compact representation. Now, different techniques of graph embedding. We will give a short gist of the different techniques that are mentioned in this paper. So the first technique that we are going to discuss in this paper is the matrix factorization. So matrix factorization based on graph embedding represents the graph properties such as node pairwise similarity in the form of matrix and factorizes this matrix to obtain node embeddings. So this approach assumes that input data lie in low dimensional manifold and aims to preserve the structure of the graph. So in which we have two types of the matrix factorization based graph embedding. The first one we are going to discuss is the graph Laplacian eigenmap, which is a graph embedding technique that aims to preserve the pairwise similarity between nodes in a graph by leveraging the eigenvalue and the eigenvector of the graph Laplacian matrix. The graph Laplacian matrix is derived from the adjacency matrix of the graph and captures the local structure and connectivity of the graph. This equation present here is basically the objective function of the above mentioned statement. In this, Wij is the similarity matrix between the node Vi and Vj. So the direct node proximity based matrix factorization is a graph embedding technique that aims to preserve the pairwise similarity between nodes in the graph by directly factorizing a node proximity matrix rather than solving a generalized eigenvalue problem. So this approach assumes that proximity between nodes can be approximation in a low dimensional space using a matrix factorization. One popular solution is to apply SVD on W. So the objective of this above direct node proximity matrix is this, of the objective function is this, that we have to minimize this. And for the SVD part, we will go with these equations that have been mentioned in the paper.
Next, we shall see the deep learning based methods for generating graph embedding. The deep learning based methods use neural network to learn graph embeddings. These methods can capture complex patterns and relationships in graphs by leveraging the expressive powers of deep neural networks. One of the two methods that can be used with deep learning involves the use of random walk. In this, we sample a random walk on the graph, and using the results of the sequence of nodes that is obtained during that random walk, we feed it into a deep neural network and try to get the embedding. Deep fork, node to vec, and metapath to vec are some examples that use such techniques. Deep fork preserves higher order proximity between nodes by maximizing the probability of observing the last W nodes and the next W nodes in the random walk that is centered at vertex I. W is the window that we are considering in this case, and the expression of the loss function is given below. Next, we have deep learning based graph embeddings without random walk. It refers to the use of deep learning models directly on the graph structure or adjacency matrix without the need of random walk sampling. These methods aim to capture the global and the local structure of the graph in a more direct manner. Some DL based graph embeddings without random walk are graph convolutional neural networks, Struct2Vec, and Graph Sage. In GCN, it defines a convolutional operator on the graph. The model basically iteratively aggregates the embeddings of the neighbors of a node and uses a function for the obtained embedding and its embedding at the previous stages to obtain the new embedding for a particular node. Such a similar method is also used in Struct2Vec and GraphSage. Due to its robustness and effectiveness, deep learning has been widely used in graph embeddings. There is another method that involves edge reconstruction based optimization. In this category of graph embedding technique, it optimizes an objective function based on the observed edges or ranking triplets in the input graph. The goal is to learn embeddings that can accurately reconstruct the edges of the original graph. One approach in the edge reconstruction based optimization is to maximize the edge reconstruction probability. The idea is that the good node embedding should be able to re-establish the edges in the original input graph. That can be achieved by maximizing the probability of generating all observed edges using node embeddings. The expression on the left shows the first proximity between two nodes Vi and Vj, where Yi and Yj are the embeddings of the nodes, and the objective function is basically the maximization of the log likelihood of this probability. Another approach in graph reconstruction method is the optimization in order to minimize edge reconstruction loss. This can be further divided into two types: distance-based loss and margin-based ranking loss. Distance-based loss aims to minimize distance between the embeddings of the connected nodes and maximize the difference between the embedding of the not connected nodes. Margin-based ranking loss, on the other hand, aims to rank the embeddings of the connected nodes higher than the embedding of the non-connected node by a certain margin. Next, we look into graph kernels. It is another technique that is used to generate embeddings and represent the whole graph as a vector by decomposing it into elementary substructures and comparing them pairwise. These atomic structures can be are called graph kernels. One example is graphlet, which is induced and non-isomorphic subgraph of a specific size. Graphlet captures the local structure patterns in a graph. Another type of atomic substructure used in graph kernel is a subtree pattern. In this approach, a graph is decomposed into subtree patterns and relabeling iteration process is performed on the labeled graph. There is a third type of graph kernel. In this approach, the graph is decomposed into random walk or path and represent at the count as the count of occurrences of random walks or path in it. In the images given below, we can see on the left, it shows the example of a graphlet for a site where we predefine the number of nodes as 3, and on the right we can see uh, an example of the subtree structure in graphs. Graph kernel has an advantage in terms of efficiency as they only need to enumerate the desired atomic structure in the graph instead of the entire graph. However, they also have a limitation. One limitation is that the substructure are not independent, which can lead to redundant information in the graph representation. Additionally, the embedding dimensionality can grow exponentially as the size of the substructure increases, resulting in a sparse embedding. Another technique for generating graph embeddings is to think of the graph as a generative model. In this type of graph embedding technique, it aims to embed the graph by modeling a generative process of the graph. This model views the observed graph as being generated from a latent space and learn to represent the graph by capturing the underlying generative factors. One example of the generative model for graph embedding is a latent distillate allocation (LDA). LDA is originally designed for text analysis but can be extended to apply for graph embeddings as well. In this approach, each node of the graph is represented as a distribution over latent topics, and each of the topic is represented as a distribution over word. The goal is to learn the latent topic distributions that can generate the observed graph structure. By embedding nodes in the latent space, LDA captures the semantic relationship between nodes based on their shared topics. Next, we see another example that is called the Bayesian not parametric infinite mixture embedding model. This model is designed to address the issue of multiple relation semantics in knowledge graph embeddings. It discovers the latent semantics of relations and leverages a mixture of relation components for embeddings. By modeling the generative process of the knowledge graph, this approach captures a complex relation between entities and relations. Generative models offer insights into underlying generative process of the graph and can capture complex relationships and latent semantics. This provides a principal way to embed graphs by modeling the generative factors that give rise to the observed graph structure. Next, we shall see the hybrid techniques, that is basically the mixture of different techniques in order to generate a better embedding for the graph. Hybrid techniques is referred to the approaches that combine multiple embedding techniques or incorporate different types of information to improve the quality of the embeddings. These techniques leverage the strength of different methods and integrate them to capture various aspects in the graph structure. One of the hybrid techniques is the mixture of matrix factorization and matrix based ranking laws. This method learns the edge-based embedding using matrix factorization and incorporates the margin-based ranking loss as a regularization term. By incorporating these two techniques, the method can capture both the structural information of the graph and the pairwise relationship between the nodes. Next, we shall see the application of the graph embeddings that has been discussed in the paper. It has discussed a number of applications. The first one being the node classification. Graph embeddings can be used for classifying nodes in a graph based on their structural properties and relationship with other nodes. Usually, stuff like SVMs can be used for these purposes. Node recommendation. Graph embeddings can be applied to recommend nodes to other based on to others users based on their preference and the similarity of nodes in the graph. Link prediction. Graph embeddings can also be used to predict missing links or future links in the graph based on the learned embeddings of nodes and edges. It can also be used to do node clustering, that in which we use k-means clustering for doing the same. Graph classification can also be done, in which the graph classification assigns a class label to the whole graph. This is important when the graph is in the unit of data. That is, the graph can show the structure of an entire molecule and stuff like that. Graph visualization. Graph embedding can be used to visualize the graph in a lower dimensional space, making it easier to understand and interpret the graph structure. The paper also discussed some future scope. So the paper discusses the following future scopes in the field of graph embedding. The first one being computational efficiency. One future direction is to improve the computational efficiency of the graph embedding techniques. This is because no existing data structure or architecture effectively accounts for the complex structure of graphs, and the computational cost of such complex structures gets exponentially high. The second one is problem setting. The dynamic graphs is identified as promising problem setting for future research. Dynamic graphs are graphs that evolve over time. Embedding techniques need to adapt to capture the temporal changes in graph structure. The paper suggests exploring techniques that can handle dynamic graphs and incorporate temporal information into the embedding. The paper also highlights the need of developing new techniques for graph embedding. While existing techniques have significant contribution, there is still room for improvement. Future research can focus on developing novel algorithms and models that can capture more complex patterns and relationships in the graph structure. Application scenarios. The paper emphasizes the importance of exploring new application scenarios that can benefit from graph embedding. By applying graph embedding to different domains and tasks, researchers can provide effective solutions to conventional problems from a different perspective. This involves identifying new applications and developing a tailored embedding technique to address the specific requirements of these scenarios. Thus, to conclude, the comprehensive survey of graph embeddings, problems, technique, and applications paper provides a comprehensive overview of the field of graph embeddings. The paper defines the problem of graph embeddings and it introduces two taxonomies for categorizing existing work based on problem setting and embedding techniques. It discusses various techniques of work graph embeddings, including matrix factorization, random walk based methods, deep learning based method, graph kernel, probabilistic model, hybrid models. The paper also explores the application of graph embedding, such as node classification, link prediction, node clustering, graph classification, community detection, graph visualization, and many others. Thank you.